One Saturday, I really wanted pancakes. I had this vision of an ideal morning. Maybe you've had it too. You know, maple syrup, butter, the whole thing. I often make pancakes with almond flour, banana, and eggs because we always have bananas floating around going brown, and I like the way they come out nutty, not too sweet, hearty. But that day, we were out of eggs and out of bananas. And in case I was thinking of making classic pancakes, we were also out of milk. But I had a vision. I would not be stopped. I wanted my Saturday pancakes. And I vaguely remembered that flaxseed and chia seeds can be a substitute for eggs and have a similar binding quality. And for reasons that have to do with a dear housemate from like 3 apartments back's former girlfriend who was vegan, we had inherited a lot of flaxseed. So in went that and chia seed and baking powder and almond flour and some oats and maple syrup and almond extract. And they came out nutty, not too sweet, hearty. And the bonus is my housemate Annie hates bananas. So now we had pancakes she could eat too. And I made her a little one. There is so much to heal in this world and in our own hearts and in our daily lives. We are healing in motion with all of the mundane, ordinary, extraordinary things of our lives alongside us. For many of us, healing, finding a way back home to ourselves is an act of faith, pointing our practices and vision for our community and spirits and our world toward the idea that a more healed life exists that we ourselves may not have ever experienced, but still might be possible. Healing, coming home to myself these days, is mostly about finding a place out of the complicated bits of our lives for real nourishment. Not pain that's passed on, redirected, or deflected, but real nourishment that feeds our bodies and our spirits. The poet Joy Harjo's words from our reading: "The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought, prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on." I remember those Saturday pancakes so clearly because as I slid the mini banana-free miracle pancake made of random bits from the cupboard onto a plate for Annie, we both got a text that a friend and comrade in the work of immigration justice had taken his own life. It was a moment of pain, shock, and fear. It was early in the pandemic, before vaccinations, but I'll confess that we got in the car immediately, went over to where he lived, and hugged everyone there we could. Over the past years, we've honored him over a Zoom memorial and with his family in Mexico. We found ways to honor him during Day of the Dead and with many family masses. Writer Indy Samrayahiva, in his essay, "I Lived Through Collapse, America is Already There," talks about his experience living through the devastation and mundanity of the Sri Lankan Civil War, and the devastation and mundanity of living through so many things right now. He writes, "I lived through the end of a civil war. I moved back to Sri Lanka in my 20s, just as the ceasefire fell apart. Do you know what it was like for me? Quite normal. I went to work, I went out, I dated." He says, "This is what Americans don't understand. They're waiting to get personally punched in the face while ash falls from the sky." He says, "That's not how it happens. This is how it happens. precisely what you're feeling now. The numbing litany of bad news, the ever-rising outrages, people suffering, dying, protesting all around you while you think about dinner. Or when someone you love dies while you're making pancakes on a Saturday. Samrajiva says, what you're feeling is exactly how it feels. It's Saturday and you're thinking about food while the world is on fire. This is normal. This is life. I have another breakfast food story about life in the midst of collapse. In this story, my father is fleeing the war in Vietnam, and he's on a plane full of other Vietnamese refugees leaving a refugee camp in Guam to come to the US to start their new lives. And of all things, they're being served waffles on the flight. And the story that gets told in my family is that no one is really sure what to do with them. Those geometric little squares, packets of golden squishy syrup, far from the pho and sticky rice that makes up many Vietnamese breakfasts. My dad had taught himself some English from TV, and so somehow he, at age 17, ended up being put on the PA system to explain the waffle. And so he did, to a plane full of people who had suffered and fought and witnessed so much collapse, and also were hungry and needed to eat. You pour the syrup in the tiny squares. You cut it up. It's breakfast. The world is on fire and we have to eat. We've been handed quite the mix of ingredients. So many of us experience that same mix as Samrajiva. We go to work, we go out, we date, we suffer, we die, we protest, we think about dinner. We put on masks because of viruses and climate change and tear gas. We text other voters and elected officials about the future of this country. We text our loved ones to see how they are surviving. We see our people as best we can at navigating this ongoing pandemic. We take chances we regret, and we regret chances we did not take. We try to guard our democracy with everything we've got, and everything we got feels not enough. And sometimes we're not even sure if this democracy is the best thing that we can be guarding. This is how it feels. Coming home, healing, working with what we've got. It's starting from, as the cookbook author Tamar Adler says in our chalice lighting, wherever you find yourself when you are hungry. It's looking at what we're working with and figuring it out with the ingredients we have. Not the ones we would have picked for this moment, but the ones we have. It's not backing down from what is in front of us, even if we really wish it were different. It's saying, screw it. There's no eggs and there's no milk, and I'm going to get to work and make pancakes because it's Saturday. We don't have nothing there in the cupboards, even if we wish we had different ingredients. We have people who will never let us go it alone. We have hard-earned lessons about what it takes to survive and thrive. We have mistakes and grit and sorrow and anger. We have faith and hysterical laughter and songs that we keep singing even if we don't always believe the words. We have deep breaths and reaching out, even though we really don't want to, but we really need to. We have grace and patience and urgency and fierce commitment. And yes, we have pancakes. We have what nourishes us even on the most horrific days, in the most of extraordinary times. Harjo says, we have given birth on this table, and we have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Anywhere we can feed each other can be home. Any moment we nourish ourselves and each other in the midst of awfulness can be home. Anytime we look at the ingredients we are given and make something that feeds us instead of giving up or passing on the pain can be healing. Wherever we are, we can create, despite it all. As Adler said in our chalice lighting, our only task is to begin. I learned a few years ago that my late grandmother Wynne had written a cookbook 40 years ago in 1980 something. I had never heard about this cookbook before. This is my same grandmother who had taken that plane and probably learned what a waffle was on it. She wrote the cookbook about Vietnamese food for the American family who opened their home to my family and to other families, sponsoring refugees after the war. In the foreword of the cookbook, she wrote, many American sponsors, while awaiting the coming of their Vietnamese families, expressed a real concern over the problem of food. They were eager to know what kind of food Vietnamese people usually eat and what difficulties they have in adjusting to American food. Well, we can say at once that like any other people throughout the world, we eat all the edible things if we can get them. Economic necessity is the main factor that dominates our eating habit. In peacetime, when food is plenty, we cook what we like. But during wartime, when food is scarce, we should be content with what we can lay hands on. That cookbook came back into the life of my family a few years ago because the American family that hosted my dad and his parents so many years ago had decided they wanted to cook from it. I don't know who will be through these months and years. I don't know how we'll transform and who will lose and what we'll live through or where it will find us. But I know that we will keep cooking from what we've got, from, as my grandmother wrote, all the edible things. That we'll keep creating in the face of it all, keep nourishing each other with the ingredients we have. And that act of creating out of what we have is for me an act of healing, an act of creating home. Nourishing each other even when the ingredients we have are not what we would want. A pandemic, systems of oppression and violence that hurt so many of us, global warming, injustice at big and small scales, all of our own pain and trauma and hurting. Harjo, perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we're laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. We have many ingredients we can gather in and mete out, burners to light and pots to fill. What are we creating? What are we beginning despite it all? What are we doing with the ingredients we're working with? If you'd like, I invite you to take a moment to think about your response to some of those questions. What are you creating? What are you beginning despite it all? What are you doing with the ingredients you're working with? For my grandmother, I imagine that writing that cookbook was an act of healing with what she had right then. She had lived through civil war and then losing a child to that war. She was starting a life over that she had never wanted to start over. In a new country with a new language, yes, with new foods, trusting total strangers to care for her survival as their own. And so she looked at the literal ingredients on the shelves in the grocery store in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so different from the markets of Saigon. And she made substitutions. She found her sources for fish sauce and lemongrass. She cooked and she fed, and she wrote it down so others could cook and eat. Whether it's Saturday pancakes or post-war pho, we heal from where we are. We make a home from where we are. Not from any other place, but with what we've got in the cupboards. Let what we are cooking be a source of healing for ourselves and our world. May it be so, and blessed be.